Hi everyone, it's Lisa Wolfe, and I am here to help you understand how to approach exegesis assignment number 4, which is due on November 13th. So that's coming up. Hopefully you have already read this assignment and started working on it even. The first thing to tell you is that yes, again, you have to go to the library to do some commentary and or journal article work, although you should know by now you can access journal articles from your home computer or your laptop from wherever you are. But for accessing high quality commentaries, most of those you'll have to find in the library. You may have found some of those in electronic form through the e-library on the St. Paul or OCU website, and that is fine as long as those are good scholarly commentaries from the library and not the internet. Before you begin, you need to read the 2 chapters assigned from the Hayes and Holiday Biblical Exegesis book. So those are chapters 8 and 9 on redaction criticism and canonical criticism. So read those chapters and plan some library time, and then go ahead and go through the steps that are on the assignment. So I'll walk you through those a little bit. This will be a pretty brief explanation. This is fairly straightforward. So first read Isaiah 7, 1 through 9, as it says, and Isaiah 45, 1 through 8 in the New Revised Standard Version. Get a little bit of a sense of what's going on in those pericopes based on your own understanding and perhaps the notes in your annotated Bible. And then, as the instructions suggest, you need to look at 2 scholarly commentaries or journal articles on each of those passages. So what I had in mind is that really you only needed 2 commentaries on Isaiah, and you could look up the commentary on Isaiah 7, 1 through 9 and 45, 1 through 8. If you want to look at journal articles, you'll probably have to have 4 resources for this part of the assignment rather than 2. And just in case you were wondering, we did not include all of this library work just to torture you, but to help you get practice with working with the library environment, finding good reference materials for your exegetical work, and to give you practice. It's all leading up to your final exegesis paper and, frankly, a lifetime of doing high quality exegesis. So if you get 2 good Isaiah commentaries, you can look up those 2 passages or 4 different articles to address the passages. Your goal is you want to try and get your head around the historical and theological context of Isaiah 1 through 9 and Isaiah 45, 1 through 8. And you should realize pretty early on that we have 2 pretty different historical contexts going on there that has implications for the theological context. Now, I am just going to encourage you to refrain from jumping into a New Testament context here. Don't do that. That's a legitimate thing to do in another time or place or setting. But for our purposes here, we want you to take these 2 pericopes on their own terms in the ancient Near Eastern context of the book of Isaiah. And we want you to get to a place where you can compare and contrast the historical and theological contexts of these passages, and then to the point of redaction criticism, try to understand why might the book of Isaiah contain both of these pericopes, just quoting from the assignment here. So the broader question of redaction criticism, what is the point of an author including certain material in a larger work? What do we learn about that author or redactor who was using more than one resource? So hopefully that is all straightforward. And of course, as always, if you have more questions about that assignment, you can post them on the Ask the Instructor discussion thread on Moodle. The second half of this assignment, which is incidentally a 2-page assignment, not including your bibliography, 1 page for redaction criticism, and your second page is canonical criticism. So again, you need to read chapter 9 in Hayes and Holiday to understand what's going on with canonical criticism. The idea being basically that you are looking at a pericope on its own terms, in its own context, but then moving on to a wider context of the whole canon as you define it. And we all should know by now that various religious traditions define canon differently, what's included in the canon. But the way I wrote this part of the assignment, I'm assuming that we are a audience who is looking at the Old Testament, or a class that's looking at both the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Christian canon, and we're not going to argue about the Apocrypha right now. So in this assignment, you're going to start with Zechariah 9, 1 through 17, and that is where you will focus your research in at least 2 scholarly commentaries or articles so that you can understand what's going on in Zechariah 9 in its own time and place. Take that on its own terms. What's the historical, theological, and literary context there? Literary issues, I'm giving you a little hint here, are pretty important in understanding this passage. The next part is to move to Matthew 21, 2 through 7, John 12, 14, and 15 to see what those passages are doing. Just briefly discuss the historical, theological, and literary issues there. And I'm not asking you to do additional research there, just you can use the notes in your annotated study Bible and cite those as needed. But your final paragraph there is going to be reflecting on the ways in which a canonical critic would understand the relationship between these 3 passages. So you have a fair amount of license there, and this is where you want to show us that you understand what canonical criticism is, that you understand what's going on in the 3 passages, but primarily in the Zechariah 9 passage, and then you can reflect on how the New Testament authors have used that passage in their own context. So yes, again, we do understand that you could write 5 pages on each of these, but don't write 5 pages on each of these. 1 page on each of these. You have to just be very succinct. That's part of the discipline. Answer the question and use the most important material to address the questions that we're asking here. So have fun with it. I think you'll learn some cool stuff. And we will look forward to reading your papers after we receive them on November 13th.